Hey, good afternoon. How are y'all doing? Thanks for being here. So I want to talk about storytelling, if that's okay. J.K. Rowling said that there's always room for a story that can transport people to another place. And a personal favorite of mine, Dennis Lehane, says that narrative is the way we make sense of chaos, and it's how we focus the world. So we believe that storytelling is fundamental, and storytelling is what my team specializes in. We work with developers, creators, day in, day out, in helping you tell your stories. My name is Colum Slevin, and I'm the head of the experiences team at Oculus VR. So we care a lot about the evolution of VR as a storytelling medium. My background was, for the past almost 30 years, I've worked in film, episodic television, game development, different types of entertainment, and for a scant 2 years, I've been working in virtual reality. And I've found that the last 2 years this last 2 years working in VR has been the most fascinating, humbling, galvanizing, just generally exciting time I've had in my experience. So, as I said, I want to talk to you about storytelling. And some of the lessons I want to share and some of the wisdom I want to try to impart or channel to you is pretty much entirely collected from the learnings of our team, the experiences team as a group. We talk a lot about our interactions with developers. We talk a lot about how to help developers succeed. We talk a lot about the hurdles and the challenges that developers face. So what we've tried to do in this talk here, and huge credit to my team for this, is feed some of those learnings in so that we can relay them to you. So I'm going to pose a couple of questions, hopefully posit a few answers, and cover a range of topics. We're going to talk about Zen Buddhism. I'm going to talk about pirate codes, and we'll see what comes up. All right. So experiences, what do we mean? Games, I think, are pretty crisply defined as consisting of agency, mastery, and skill. And experiences are less crisply defined than that. Experiences are a hybrid discipline that uses techniques from game development, but also from cinema, from improv, from live theater, and a number of other creative disciplines, with the intent of evoking empathy, creating a sense of immersion, and first and foremost, to tell you a story. So the experiences team helps people tell stories, and we're passionate about the evolution of the platform as a storytelling medium, but we're also really focused on the growth of this medium as a viable commercial reality for developers. So let's talk about where we are with all of that. So this goal of building a viable, sustainable business for creators and developers has a simple set of goals. We want to help you make art. We want to help you identify and delight an audience, retain that audience, keep them coming back, and repeat that cycle until, as we said, the ecosystem is there. So a number of people, and certainly the development community at large, has been in the weeds for a couple of years now. And when you're in this groove of trying to figure out how to make something like this work, it's easy sometimes to think that you've come a really long way or a lot has happened. And in truth, a lot has occurred in a relatively short span of time. I thought it would be useful to look at those occurrences through the lens of some recent history. So this timeline shows you both the series of technological innovations that have occurred over the last 4 years in terms of headset manufacturer, just the major launches, as well as a far from complete but relatively definitive, I think, list of landmark pieces of experiential VR. So it's a lot, and it's mounting, and the quality and complexity and sophistication is mounting. But when you look at this through the lens of history, specifically through the lens of the evolution of cinematic art, it puts things in a different perspective. So when you look back over the last 100 years, you notice that, again, the timeline is constructed here of major technological advancements juxtaposed with landmark entertainment experiences or movies that were launched along the way. And as you can see from this timeline, we're in our infancy as a medium. As a storytelling medium, we're in our infancy. The other thing that this timeline doesn't show you, although it's completely interwoven here, is the evolution of the language and vocabulary of cinema. Because as we all know, cinema and movies have a language and have a vocabulary, both a spoken and written sort of creative shorthand that we use to express creative ideas in a way we all understand, as well as a visual language that's imprinted on us pretty deeply as a species. We don't have this yet for VR, although the seeds are there and it's growing. It's an evolving vocabulary for this emergent medium. And although the common language is coming and it's growing, it's not going to happen overnight and it can't be forced. And it will emerge through sort of the collective creative expression of the people in this room and the development community in general. And if you'd like a deeper dive on this topic, I recommend you go see Jess Brillhart talk about the application of cinematic tools in VR tomorrow. So let's talk about the roadmap. Game developers, I think it's fair to say, had a head start for a couple of different reasons. Game developers got started literally physically earlier in critical mass in VR than other types of developers. But most importantly, the real-time tools are native to game developers. And though I would never suggest that games are a solved problem in VR, I do think it's true to say that for the most part, the game development community has a pretty good sense now, each game developer has a pretty good sense now when they set out to produce a project of what their creative aim is and what the different problems they're going to need to solve along the way to express that creative aim or hit that creative aim. So they're no longer really struggling with the basics and the fundamentals of game design in VR. And what's more, there are already great examples out there, many great examples out there of role model, landmark game titles in VR that others can look to emulate or to see what success really looks like in a certain genre. For example, and Jason Rubin and others talked about this in the keynote this morning, Ready at Dawn's game Lone Echo, which was produced by the Oculus Studios team, is an extraordinary game. And what's more, it's an extraordinarily well-received game. It has an 89 Metacritic, which is a remarkable score, for a game, not to mention a VR game. So we believe that's a signal that VR games, certainly this game in particular, are competing on a one-to-one basis creatively and technically with console and PC games. If you contrast that with the filmmaking community and the narrative community in general, it's quite a different picture. Even the most experienced filmmaker who's producing VR for the first time is operating at a significant handicap for two basic reasons. Number one, the tools of the trade are unfamiliar, and what's more, the learning curve for those tools is steep. And second of all, the mechanics of the narrative craft are evolving still. So one of the sort of refrains we have internally, and I've been talking to people in the hallways about this all day today, and it's something we talk about a lot in work, is that the learning curve for narrative creators and for filmmakers and for non-games developers is fundamentally steeper, and the road can be rockier. But the results are more than worth it. The power of this medium as a narrative, as a storytelling tool, as a narrative tool, is second to none in ways we're going to talk about. But the road can be tough. We don't want to kid you. So let's talk a little bit about what we do know. In the technology industry, we have a mild to severe obsession with data and analytics, right? So we're obsessed with measurement, we're obsessed with certitude, and we're obsessed with calling winners and losers and pointing the way in a crisp and clear way, and sort of codifying our learnings into actionable rules that we can apply to our business and see a result. So let me talk a little bit about a couple of the things that we do know based on the data so far for narrative VR. What works? So big IP is really powerful. It has been for a long time, not going to change anytime soon. We see it very clearly in the numbers. People gravitate towards worlds universes, characters, stories that they know and love, and they come back pretty regularly, even if the experiences are extremely brief. And that's right now. So we believe pretty strongly that the depth and richness of those types of experiences needs to evolve in order for it to basically keep pace with the escalating sophistication and expectations of the VR audience. So as people's viewing patterns mature and change, very brief experiences may no longer continue to sustain their interest. But for now, Big IP is indisputably a massive draw in the VR ecosystem in general. Second of all, thrill rides, roller coasters, whatever you want to call them, brief, intense, thrilling experiences are incredibly beloved and very retentive. This is a still from the amazing Replicant Pursuit from Blade Runner 2049 by Turtle Rock. And what is powerful, particularly we think, in terms of retention for titles like this, is people come back to it all the time, mainly because we believe they are demoing for friends and family and loved ones a lot, which is great because they believe the content is worth showing to other people, but also the form factor of the content really lends itself to that. So I think it's important to know, and that, by the way, that's a totally valid use case and one we love and support, and we hope it endures, because people who don't have headsets being basically sold into VR by their friends and family is great. Long term, we think it's important to see the difference or track the difference between a current trend that's very successful versus a long-term pattern of something that becomes a sure thing. The VR audience is nascent and it's growing, and the viewing patterns, as I was saying, are still in flux, so it's something we keep our eye on. But for now, incredibly popular. Thrill rides are incredibly popular with the audience. What do we know? So those two things we know with relative certainty. And when it comes to certainty in general, beyond that, that's pretty much it. So I'm not going to say that because it's hyperbolic, but it's kind of true. Everyone is figuring this out. I personally, I've got a decent number of miles on the clock in terms of having worked in creative industries since, before most of you were born. I've been working in, my first job in production was in 1987. I've had a lot of luck and a great time helping really talented people make amazing stuff for a relatively long time. My team, similarly, has an incredible collective set of experience in design and production and creative and numerous other disciplines. So far this year, we've funded, produced, and launched over 20 experiences and helped developers garner accolades for those experiences, including 3 Emmy Awards. So we're really proud of that. But more importantly, it's sort of just a testament to the amount of shared experience we have with the development and creative community. But one thing, because we get asked a lot, like what are the lessons you learn, what are the signposts we have? And one thing a refrain that comes back to us all the time is we're developing an allergy to rules and developing a general skepticism about the concept of rules, especially ones that are hard and fast. I mean, remember the rule about don't move the camera in VR? That was a rule. That was a thing you shouldn't do. Remember the rule about you can't edit in VR, don't cut in VR, it'll make people sick or it'll kill them or whatever. That was a rule, right? Both completely untrue and not borne out by the content we see being successful right now, but it felt right at the time, right? So what we've done is, as we've started to, first of all, we've tried to shut up, right? We've tried to just shut up and learn and absorb and watch what's happening and watch the data and the viewer behavior. But basically, I'd say we've learned the importance of humility. I think we've learned the importance of curiosity and the importance of an open mind in general. We've also learned that rules and pronouncements are dangerous things in such a young industry. We've learned that a willingness to adapt and be flexible to changing scenarios is really important, it's really vital. And the words of this wise man that I'm going to play for you ring in my ears a lot. So that's Captain Barbossa's maxim, right? Try to think about guidelines rather than actual rules. So there's the pirate code bit. So pirate code aside, we have accrued some knowledge. I'm being coy slightly, and let me talk to you about some of those things. So the dimensions are, the guidelines or tactics are sort of basically nuts and bolts behaviors, good common sense development practices that we've noted when they're successful and noted when they're not put into practice, and just good behaviors for developers to have that I thought we would share. Some strategies which are more like mindsets or guiding principles, organizing principles for your team and your business that we think are just really healthy, again, things to bear in mind. And woven in the fabric, a set of beliefs and hypotheses and just general recipes we think are again, a good recipe for success. So let me talk about the guidelines first. There are a number of these. I'm going to run through them. So it's not cool to be unprepared. And it is smart to be in a state of readiness when you're embarking on this journey. And we like the idea of constantly questioning your decisions and your path and assessing where you're going. But asking yourself a series of critical questions as you embark on this journey is really, really important. The first question, the most important question to ask yourself is why? Like, why am I doing this? Why am I telling this story in VR? There are so many other options. Why this medium? Why is it right? So what's the key reason you want to express this narrative via this medium? What is it that makes VR unique and distinct and perfect for this story? It's a really important question to ask. It's a difficult question to answer, but it's literally the foundation for everything you're going to do. So I think this is a really good example, and I think Arnaud and the guys are probably here, but I made a promise a year ago I'd stop talking about notes on blindness because I was making everybody sick I was talking about it so much, but I can't because it's great, and second of all, it's a perfect example of a resounding and good answer to this question, right? Because notes on blindness, as the team will tell you more eloquently than I can, went through a series of different iterations of what the format would be. Like, it's a movie, it's a long-form article, it's a podcast. There were a number of different tries at what was the best way to tell John Hull's story. And eventually the team hit on this idea of VR because it literally enabled them to embody you in this unique physical and mental and emotional sensation in a way that no other medium could. So it's just a great example of a perfect answer to the question, why VR? The question about your target platform is really timely and germane right now. With the announcements we had this morning about new upcoming platforms, it's something that we talk about on every project, and we don't talk about it early enough, almost ever. So building for your target platform and thinking about your target platform from day one is critical. Don't leave it to the end. Certainly don't defer the decision about how long it will take to port or what you might do with the experience a little later until too late in the schedule, because you will undoubtedly regret it. So the good news is that headsets are proliferating. There are many other channels and platforms emerging now within our ecosystem for people like developers like you to tell stories. But the challenge is that unless you take a thoughtful approach to the platform, you'll end up with a very fragmented and challenging development pipeline, and you may end up potentially compromising your experience on one platform or over another. So basically the simple question is, what is the best expression of this story I'm trying to tell? Does it require 6 degrees of freedom? Is it more appropriate with 3 degrees of freedom? Does it require fully articulated touch controls, or is there a different mechanic that's going to work? And then playing from there. And it's perfectly fine for you to decide to target one platform and one platform only. I mean, there are obviously consequences to that decision and things you want to think about there in terms of your reach, but it's better to do it, measure twice and cut once and do it clean than to, as I say, compromise your story on multiple platforms. The Felix and Paul guys will tell you that the experience of developing Mayubi for multiple platforms. So Mayubi is an extraordinary experience on Rift in particular. So a 40-minute narrative, a blend of live action and real time, interactivity built in, an experience that proved the hypothesis for us that people will watch a feature-length story all the way to the end if that story is compelling, which was not something we knew. And yet the experience, the team had real problems and real challenges in creating a universally delightful experience on both the mobile and the PC platform. And it was a really good lesson in thinking about that process early and deeply. The community. So I'm looking at it, but basically compare notes with each other. We strongly encourage you guys to engage, discuss your trials and tribulations together. I think the hallmark of a healthy creative community is generosity with knowledge, and I think this is a very generous community. I think there are amazing online resources. There are tons of great Facebook groups to participate in particular. There's also this dynamic cyclical opportunity to engage with the community through the film festival circuit and through the plethora of VR conferences and events that there are. A month doesn't go by, sometimes a week doesn't go by where there isn't some kind of gathering or get together. And there are teams like Kaleidoscope that are here to facilitate and support the development community as well. So take advantage of that, by all means lean into that in a big way. It's a great community. Okay, let me talk about planning. So a strong producer, as I'm not telling you anything you don't know, a strong producer is worth their weight in gold. And if you're not one, I suggest you get one. One of the most profound and lasting lessons I learned was early in my career. I was working in animation. I worked with an animation producer who was extraordinarily capable at seeing a project through from beginning to end and retaining the creative vision. And she had a very simple process, which she called her critical assumptions phase. So it's not something she invented as a producer, but it's a discipline she followed very rigorously and successfully. And rather than thinking about the 1,001 different things that can go sideways or wrong in a project from the start to the finish, she would establish a really simple list of 5 to 10 things that were the basic conditions of success for the project. Like what has to happen in order for us not to fail, and just adhere to those and treat them like a North Star. And once you start failing to live up to those critical assumptions, don't lie to yourself and think you're still on track. Build in contingency and expect the unexpected. Build ample time in your schedule for prototyping. It's really important. For video, pre-visualize and storyboard. Shoot rough animatics of your work of your piece with cheaper equipment. For more complicated shots, if you're going to move the camera, if you're going to experiment with up close and complex stereo stuff, test those shots out as well way ahead of time, because post is expensive and reshoots are even more so. So get out in front of that. For CG in real time, same thing. Get in the engine and make an animatic as early as you can, but also test out and prototype your interactivity, which I can't emphasize enough, and build a detailed design plan for your experience. This is also a really good time to think about your business plan. So to be thinking about, like, what am I making? Who's it for? What is its value to them? And talk to us about this. We can help you. But it's never too soon to be thinking about what the value proposition and what the business plan is for your content. All of these things are things you can talk to us about. We're here to help you, but by all means, please make a plan. Having said that, don't spend too long in your plan. Whatever you do, don't plan too much. So I just love this cartoon. Don't spend too long on paper or in a spreadsheet. I will say that this is a perennial challenge with film-based teams that we, and I say we because that's where I come from, spend too long on the page and spend too long on paper. So, and what's even worse, sometimes we try to go back and fix like issues we have with interactivity or agency or presence. People want to go back to the script and fix it on the page when that ship has long sailed. So test your assumptions about what's fun and compelling and interesting in VR in the headset as soon as you can, and remember and think about when it's time to get off the page and into the virtual world. So it feels like comfort is in many ways, job one for us as developers and headset people for our users. Inadvertently uncomfortable experiences are deal breakers. Technical problems that cause them, which are often a byproduct of inadequate or insufficient planning or lack of time to prototype. Someone's going to take off the headset, they're not having a good time, and your story's over before you've had a chance to tell it. So think about your users' comfort and bear it in mind. It's your responsibility to them. But having said that, people want to feel something. The data shows us that many people show up to the headset explicitly looking for a thrill and to be moved, literally and figuratively. So VR is an inherently visceral medium, and we, as headset manufacturers in many ways at Oculus, tend to have an unconscious bias to over-indexing towards comfort. So if you intend to create an intense experience for your user, you should do so, and you should do so in a way that serves your narrative, but do it with intention. Don't make it unintentional or inadvertent. A couple of examples, one specific and one general. So the Mr. Robot virtual reality experience, again, this is one that I need to declare a moratorium on because I talk about it too much, but it's fantastic by Within, directed by Sam Ismail. So I think this is a really great example of a director in total control of his audience's vestibular senses. I think that the job this team did of using cinematic tools to create a sense of isolation and unease and paranoia in the viewer is extremely effective. It's one of the first examples I remember seeing, although it's probably not the first example. It's one of the first examples I recall of real directorial and authorial control in VR, and it evokes the original property in a new and unique way. More general example is one I referred to earlier, roller coasters, thrill rides. People want them. They want to feel something. No one's going to get in a headset and want to go on a ride and take a nap. So make them feel something. It's okay to be passive, doesn't have to be interactive, but just don't bore people. So those are sort of the two sides of the comfort coin that you need to think about when you're telling the story. Embodiment is a big topic. So the point of view that you give the user when they're in the headset matters a lot in terms of how you're telling your story. First person is not intrinsically superior to third person. It just depends on what you're trying to achieve. It's fundamentally odd to have a body in VR. And if you're going to give me a body and a set of limbs, then you should really do so with the express oversight of a designer and a team that really know how to do that. There's a lot of knowledge out there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. But make sure that this is something, if you're going to embrace it and you're going to do it, that you do it well. Again, creators with great narrative expertise occasionally underestimate the complexity of believable embodiment. And poorly executed, this is something that will break the suspension of disbelief and take people out of your story immediately. When it's well executed, it's completely delightful. So this is a piece of the Pixar's Coco trailer that we showed in the keynote earlier today, produced by Magnopus in collaboration with Pixar and our team. And not photoreal, not a physically real world, but a completely delightful character to inhabit and a really fun place to be. And everything right down to the lagging foot drags when you move around are completely one-to-one and really delightful and really well done. Interactivity. So it's really not something to be taken lightly when you're trying to tell a story. It's harder than we all think it is. And when you are taking an existing narrative and trying to apply an interactive scheme to it, very often the first go-to for people is branching narrative in this style. So everyone knows what these are, choose your own adventure books. So this is a fine choice. A branching narrative is a fine choice, but there are two things to think about with branching narrative. The first thing to think about is that it's significantly harder than most people realize it is. Creating a compelling branching storyline means you have to have multiple, I just saw John Gamble from Telltale in here and he'll know this, but you have to have multiple compelling stories that can all stand, can have integrity and stand on their own. And you have to be able to tie those story threads together in a compelling way at the end. It's not easy to do. There's a reason very few people are doing it. Having said that, completely legitimate thing to do. The second thing is, it's just not the only approach to take. There are many other opportunities and ideas about how to weave interactivity into a story that's going to support and help you drive the narrative. Interactive environments, interactive characters, reactive environments that respond to your behavior, companions that either guide you or propel you through an experience, gaze-based interactions that feel very fluid versus touch-based, which drive a much more, expect a greater sense of agency from you. They're all valid. They just need to be focused on supporting the narrative. So a couple of examples. This is Oscar Raby's Turning Forest experience with the BBC. And I love this experience. I love the interaction model they use because it is delightful and deceptively simple. Basically, you're interacting with the environment. You're touching the world and the characters. And everything it does and the feedback it gives you serves to tell you more about the world you're in and more about the characters and the creatures you're encountering. And it just deepens and creates a richer experience and more delightful experience because it's got music that responds to you in the way you interact. There is zero fat on this interaction model. It's really simple and a masterclass. Manifest 99 by Flight School, also another one we're big fans of. A very simple, again, deceptively simple, but very creepy gaze-based eye contact model where you maintain eye contact with characters in order to teleport into their bodies and move yourself through the story. And that, combined with the physical constraints of the train carriages, creates this sort of sense of propulsion that pulls you through the story and maintains the momentum of the narrative in a very compelling way. But a very unique use of gaze-based interaction. Maybe by Felix and Paul. Again, another very elegant interaction model that has no spare fat on it at all. The collection of totems and tokens throughout the experience leads you to unlock scenes and unlock part of your backstory, deepens your understanding of who you are as a character, deepens your understanding of the world you're inhabiting, and reveals Easter eggs about the entire experience. And it's just totally delightful. So prototyping is something I talked about earlier, and experimentation is really important. So we make assumptions about what's fun in VR, again, very often based on what's on the page. And until we get it in the headset and start hacking at it and prototyping it, especially for interactivity, early and often, we don't really know what we have. The Future Lighthouse guys who announced Melita today, which is viewable at the conference and is an experience I recommend you check out, told us that they were mistaken many times about what would work in their experience. They had a story they wanted to tell, but until they put the screenplay into the engine and realized that the entire thing needed to be rethought in a bunch of different ways, they didn't really know what they had. So you learn from that process what creates great presence, and the permutation of movement and proximity and scale and audio needs to be tweaked and adjusted and sometimes reconstructed in order to hit your goal, but prototype. Marketing is often left until the last minute or forgotten about entirely or left up to the store team. So don't underestimate the importance of owning your own destiny when it comes to marketing. It's a key complement to your creative process. It is something you should be thinking about in conjunction with your production and creative plan. You can create something amazing, but if no one knows about it and if you don't market it effectively, you're a tree falling in the forest and it just won't be heard. So work with a team or an expert that understands VR and understands how to help you sell and market your content. But also just think about the assets you have. Think about your app thumbnails. Think about your cover art. Think about a trailer. Think about a 2D trailer, a 360 trailer, whatever it might be. Think about all these assets and work with us. We can help you imagine what the best solution will be, but build these into your plan. Let me talk a little bit about some of the strategies. Those are the 9 guidelines. So the first one, I have a caveat about this one. Okay, so in Zen Buddhism, and this is the Zen Buddhism part I was telling you about, there's this term called Shoshin. And so there's a quote by a Zen master, and I'm going to tell you what it is. But before I do, I just want to acknowledge the Erlich Bachmann-esque irony of quoting a Zen master at a tech conference, and I'm just gonna own that and embrace it and move past it. So here's a quote, right? In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. And the reason that quote resonated with me is it called to mind a conversation I was having with a developer, Alex Henning from Magnopus. And Alex had worked in the early days of computer graphics and visual effects, as had I. And we were having a discussion about how terrifying and thrilling it was to work in movie making at a time when computer graphics were just starting to come into their own in the early to mid 90s. What Alex said was, what was exciting about those times was everything was a prototype. Nothing had a certain outcome. And you had to have this white knuckle, flexible, let's see what happens attitude towards everything. And that's what VR is like right now. It's completely terrifying, but it's completely gratifying when it works, because there are no proven recipes for things. There are only different ways of approaching the problem. So I think it's really important to maintain this open, youthful mindset about how you're approaching your projects, and it's certainly what we try to do every day. So this is a big word, and I think there are two ways I want to talk about diversity and how it applies to experience development from the point of view of us on the experiences team at Oculus. First of all, diversity of thought and disciplinary diversity, we believe, is really, really important. There are no truly native creators in this space. We're all coming to this from somewhere else with a pre-loaded set of baggage and whatever else is coming along. So it's a hybrid medium. It commands a hybrid skill set, and a diverse skill set, mindset, and team is the single most important factor in your success, I believe. So if you're a film person, even with deep expertise, seek out a game designer. If you're a game designer, look for someone with a cinematic eye, but mix up the skill sets on your team. It will lead the way. Second of all, I was at the diversity lunch earlier today and listening to some team members talk about this. This is a really key part of the landscape right now. For us, working in experiences, we consider this a wide open play space. To us, the experiences audience is absolutely everybody. So we really feel that it behooves us and it behooves our development community to be thinking about a diverse and intersectional approach to what we do. It's really important. It's a moment in time. And it's incumbent on us as, producers and platform owners to help foster diverse creators right now. And it's something we work very hard to do. We're very committed to supporting a diverse creative community. And it's a technological and creative melting pot, and we want everyone to melt. Thank you. Thank you, Bruce. Lose the baggage. This is kind of what I was just talking about. This is a lesson I learned very deeply myself. I think everyone who comes to this medium with a lot of experience in game development or software design or film has a ton of experience, and what you learn is a certain amount of the experience is value and a certain amount of your experience is baggage. And I strongly recommend that you learn to tell the difference and park the baggage, because sometimes we stand on, part of the downside of having these disciplinary diverse teams is it becomes a very polarizing conversation over language and semantics, right? So just don't do that. Just move past it. The overlap in the Venn diagram of the people who can leave behind the stuff they learned at film school and working in film, people who can leave behind the stuff they learned being a development director on a game or whatever, are the people who succeed in VR. So something I try to do every day, and I recommend you do. So we really feel strongly, we have a conversation with developers all the time about expressing themselves in their own voices. Don't assume the platform expects and needs specific things from you in terms of genre and storytelling. Very often we'll hear a developer say, hey, we saw a lot of things of this nature on your platform, so we've decided we're going to build a thing like that because that's what you want, right? And what we really want is for you to tell your own story and to be able to stand over it and drive it, and that's what we want. We don't have answers necessarily, so we want you to be you. All right, so we care very much about the evolution of this platform as a storytelling medium. It's all that matters to us. It's the reason our team exists. We're here to build a viable and sustainable business as well, or die trying. And although there are many moving parts and changing rules and all of the evolving pieces we talked about, our goals remain simple. We're here to help you make art, help you identify and delight an audience, help that audience come back and feel that they've got a place to be, and repeat that process. So we're very committed to growing this entire ecosystem for storytellers. So you want to meet the team? I want to show you the team. This is the team. And this is what happens when you have an extraordinarily gifted professional photographer on your team, and you say, Eric, can you take a team photo? And he says, can I do it in bullet time? You say, yes, Eric, whatever you want. So this is the experiences team at Oculus, and most of them are here. So after we wrap up, I'm gonna leave some time for some questions. After we wrap up, Dorian, Kat, Itcha, Yelena, Christina, and Eric and I will hang out outside and stop us and talk to us, and we will, if there are questions that are deeper or more specific, then we can ask in the open mic session. We're happy to do that for you. So with that, I have amazingly left time in the space for some Q&A. I'm going to take some questions. If you have a question, there are 2 mics here in the middle that our gracious hosts will thank you for using. And I'm happy to take your questions, and a couple of questions, and then I'll wrap up and we'll take it from there. Anybody got something they want to talk about?